Welcome to the season opener for GridPulse podcast. I'm Bryce Yonker with Grid Forward. We have with us today Commissioner Hudson from the great state of Virginia. Commissioner, thanks for being on with us.
Thank you, Bryce. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I know that you have an important post there with the Virginia Commission as a judge. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about what brought you into that position.
Well, again, thank you, Bryce, for having me. It's really great to be here with you today. As you mentioned, I'm Jehmal Hudson. I serve as a commissioner at the Virginia State Corporation Commission, and I'm also first vice president of NARUC, which is the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. So very briefly, I think what led me here is that I've always been interested in where big systems meet real life. And I think that electricity is one of those systems. It's about reliability, it's about economics, and it's certainly about competitiveness as well as affordability, and it's happening all at once. Now, as far as my background, I spent about a decade at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in congressional affairs. So I've seen how federal policy gets made. And now, in my current role, I get to see where implementation becomes practice. So it's kind of like a combination of where what you really get to shape how you approach the work. And the way I approach the work is I think my work is about being practical, it's being evidence-based, and it's always about focusing on the outcomes that balance the interest between the utilities and the customers. And so for me, I'm pretty much motivated by building systems that people can trust. So that's about reliable service, it's about fair rates, and a grid that can support the future.
Well, we're super glad to have you on for our first conversation this season under our new name, the GridPulse name. And I know you've got your finger on the pulse of the industry, but maybe you can share a little bit about, from your perspective, what are some of those main drivers that are shaping the energy landscape here right now? We're recording here at the beginning of March in 2026.
Sure. I think that if I had to summarize the energy landscape right now, I would say that we're in an era of speed, scale, and constraint. First, demand growth, it's here in a very serious way today, and that's driven by data centers, artificial intelligence, electrification, advanced manufacturing, and even the broader economic growth. Second is resource adequacy, which I think is really a front and center issue today. Retirements are happening, and we're all trying to work through what really counts as new generation in a modern sense, not just about capacity, but deliverability and reliability during stress conditions. Third, there's rate pressures. Customers are feeling inflation, and utilities are really facing higher capital costs. Fourth, I think we're dealing with a lot of constraints. You see interconnection queue challenges, transmission build timelines, supply chain, and even workforce issues. And lastly, I think that there's a federal state dynamic that's really evolving right now. We're seeing increased federal attention on transmission, interconnection, large loads, and that really requires a lot of coordination to try to avoid a lot of friction. So I'll sum it up by saying that demand is accelerating, investments needs are rising, and the system has to move a lot faster without breaking the trust of the customers.
Oh, that's right on, Jehmal. I'll probably go back and forth between that and Judge Hudson, but just let me know.
Fine, not a problem.
Let's talk a bit about the dynamics in Virginia. So I think those were all true nationally, but they're also true in Virginia. You know, our listeners are going to well know that that's, epicenter to the data center surge that's been coming online, and that had come online for some time. How would you kind of color some additional insights around, in particular in Virginia, what those drivers are looking like and what's unfolding?
Sure. In Virginia, it's definitely known for its data centers. It's been called the data center capital of the world, and that's real. But Virginia is also a state where the grid is directly tied to a lot of national priorities. We have major defense installations. We have a growing economy. And we also have a footprint that's increasingly important for digital infrastructure. So I think a few Virginia-specific dynamics that really shape the priorities are, one, it's speed to power. We're seeing large loads that have very aggressive timelines. And that puts pressure on planning, interconnection processes, and infrastructure sequencing. Two is reliability expectations. They're really extremely high right now. The digital infrastructure doesn't really take into account a lot of the uncertainty that the way loads historically could. And so I think the conversation really becomes very quickly what combination of generation, transmission, and flexibility really delivers for dependable service. Three is affordability is not optional. Even when economic development is strong and it's growing, our job as state regulators is to protect customers. So we're really focused on who bears what costs and how we manage the risk so that existing customers are not subsidizing uncertainty. Four is resource adequacy and deliverability. It's not about adding megawatts. It's really about, can you deliver when you need it? Can the transmission system support it? And do you have fuel assurance and operational flexibility? And five is definitely all about coordination. Virginia sits inside a very larger regional context. So that means our decisions have to be informed with regional planning realities, but also grounded in state accountability. Because at the end of the day, the customers in Virginia, they're the ones that actually paid the bill. And so I think for me, when I think about Virginia's priorities and why they're important, it's really about, as the government looks more closely at the large loads and interconnection, Virginia is one of those places where those choices really become very tangible and very quickly.
Well, that is a great foundation. The first area we're going to take our conversation, as you mentioned, you're a commissioner, you're a state regulator, and we're going to talk a little bit about that state regulator role, and then we'll dive into some deeper details. But the buck stops or starts for significant grid projects with these state commissioners, with these regulators. What are we getting right in this process right now? And are there areas that we need to look at improving with how the dynamics of the industry are putting pressure on kind of the requirements for the system right now?
I would say what we're getting right is that the state regulation is fundamentally built for public accountability. We have open proceedings. We require evidence. We test assumptions. And we put costs and benefits on the record. That transparency matters because we're making long-lived decisions. Where we can improve is mostly about the speed and the coordination without sacrificing that process. We need planning. We need better queue management. We need clearer sequencing of upgrades so that the projects don't stall late in the process. And we should be honest that the traditional approach that we have, it doesn't really match the pace of the demand growth that we're experiencing right now. So I'd say we certainly want to keep the discipline, but we also want to certainly improve the execution. And I think the more work that we're able to do, especially do it earlier, I think it will certainly be able to help us and be in a situation where we're not reacting so late in the process.
Well, you mentioned affordability in both of your opening comments, both nationally and at the state, and I think you're right on there. Rate pressure in many locations is such a real issue. I'll say within the last 3 years, maybe there's some other timelines for some other jurisdictions. But how does a modernized grid, right, as we make critical investments in the capabilities that we need for the system, also balance this affordability imperative that you were talking about?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that we have to be very direct. The grid can't be modernized on the backs of customers who can't afford it. So affordability isn't really a side constraint. It's really a core outcome. And so I think that balancing really requires three things. One, it's disciplined planning. The worst affordability outcome is building the wrong thing and paying for it 30 or 40 years later. So we need better forecasting, scenario analysis, and stress testing. Two is risk allocation. For large loads, especially, we should structure arrangements so existing customers aren't holding the bag for stranded upgrades. And three is pacing and prioritization. Not every upgrade has the same value. Some are reliability critical. Some are for other things that are really important. But regulators should insist on sequencing that that delivers the most value for the customers and making sure that's a top priority. And I'll just quickly add, I think affordability also means helping customers use less. So that's opportunities to looking at efficiency, demand response, and targeted programs that matter because they do reduce the system cost over time.
Great. So, shameless plug, our main event this year is focused on affordability. And so we're diving into the deep end of the pool. Can I ask you a couple deeper questions on this? This isn't fully fleshed out, but like I want to throw two ideas by you and see what your thoughts are on, the sort of outcome that you think they can have on affordability. One would be capacity utilization, right? So if we use our systems more, it seems like the math is pretty apparent that we're going to, put downward pressure on rates. It doesn't come automatically. I know that the capacity utilization in Virginia is actually relatively high versus some other parts of the country. But curious to your thoughts on both that topic as well as just, I guess I'll call it capital efficiency, right? If we get the job done but spend less money doing it, seems like that also has a pretty good path towards affordability. Any thoughts on either of those two areas in particular?
No, absolutely. I think that this is one of the most important questions when we're talking about the entire grid conversation because the fastest megawatt is often the one that you unlock, not the one that you are actually able to build. At NARUC, one of the things that we've done was most recently was adopt a resolution that supported the integration of advanced transmission technologies, also known as ATTs, which precisely it's used because the data shows that we have significant untapped capacity that's sitting in the system. Now, at the time we passed that resolution, congestion costs all across organized markets have more than doubled since 2016. And I think that really tells us something very clearly. It says that we're stressing the existing infrastructure. Now, we also have over 2,000 gigawatts of generation and storage projects waiting in interconnection queues, and the average wait times have more than doubled over the past decade. So the bottleneck isn't just generation, it's transmission deliverability. Now, the U.S. Department of Energy's National Transmission Needs Study found that we may need to expand regional transmission capacity anywhere from 20% to 128% by 2035, and interregional capacity even more so. So that massive build out, if done traditionally, is going to be really, really challenging. So what does getting more out of what we already have actually mean? To me, I think that means deploying technologies to unlock latent capacity in existing lines before defaulting to new corridors. Grid enhancing technologies, things like advanced power flow controls, dynamic line ratings, and topology optimization can really increase utilization on new and existing transmission lines by 16% or more and reduce congestion by 50% or more. Now, the Department of Energy also found that these tools can generate over $5 billion annually in production cost savings. That's real money. That's real reliability impact. And so there's reconductoring with high performance conductors. That's another area that we can look at very closely where carbon and composite core conductors, superconductors, things like that. The Department of Energy has found that reconductoring can double the capacity of existing lines at roughly half the cost of building a new transmission line. So when we talk about unlocking infrastructure, this isn't theoretical. These technologies are commercially available and they have been deployed internationally for years. And so for a regulator standpoint, this is really compelling for three reasons. First, it's speed. Reconductoring and get deployment can often move faster than greenfield lines. Second, it's cost discipline. Customers benefit from avoided or deferred capital costs. And third is public acceptance. I think upgrading an existing corridor is often less contentious than building a new one. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't need new transmission, but we should sequence it wisely try to find out where we can actually unlock and look at that as a priority, but also looking at where it's a priority to build as well at the same time. And so that's why NARIC's board really recognized both the technical potential and the ratepayer benefits of holistic ATT deployment and supported federal and state collaborations to really accelerate the adoption, including programs like grid resilience and grid innovation partnerships. So if I had to boil it down, I would say that getting more out of the infrastructure we already have really means deploying grid enhancing technologies at scale, reconductoring strategically, reducing congestion before overbuilding, and treating advanced technologies as a top option. Because every megawatt that we unlock efficiently really helps with affordability, reliability, and speed to power all at the same time.
So good. I mean, I would have added storage and maybe some of the demand side stuff into that, but I mean, that's absolutely the piece. So I'm not gonna tangent because it's great. Let's talk about rate structure a little bit, and in particular, industrial rates. So often we've incentivized industrial development with really competitive rates. They're buying for long periods of time. They're buying large amounts. But it seems like we need to really be balancing what the demands are for the digital infrastructure requirements, in particular around data centers. Do you think that we're going to start seeing, more unique tariff structures to be able to accommodate these large digital infrastructure loads, or how are we going to be able to integrate them effectively without adverse impacts coming on the rest of the customer base?
Sure, I will say that we are right now at the point that I think is a really inflection point, not only in Virginia, but I think nationwide. When we made our decision back in November of 2025 to issue an order to approve Dominion's biennial review, one of the most important questions that was before us was, do you create a special rate structure or a special customer class for data centers? And what we decided in that order was that what we would do is create a general scale 5 or a GS5 scale, which is a detailed structured tariff for customers who actually have more than 25 megawatts of demand, as well as 75% of the load factor. Now, this is basically, it's very agnostic. So it's for basically customers who actually fall into that category, not solely for data centers. But in addition to that, what we did was we also made sure that we created a minimum demand charge. And again, for customers who wanted to make sure that 85% is actually paid for transmission and distribution, as well as 60% of the generation. And what we were really trying to do, both with the GS scale and the minimum demand charge, is two things. We wanted to make sure that there was more transparency when it comes to cost causation. We wanted to make sure we were doing our best to prevent cross-subsidization of residential customers. And we also wanted to have some more precise accounting when it comes to transmission, generation, distribution exposure. So ultimately, it was how do we make sure we protect the residential customers from any type of exposure to billions of dollars of the speculative investment risk. And for the minimum demand charge, it was to make sure that if we need new substations or transmission lines, it would totally be paid for. And I think this is only the beginning. Right now, I don't think it's a silver bullet. We'll probably learn more as a couple of years go on. But we are seeing other states, such as Indiana and other states across nationwide, who are actually looking at their tariffs and trying to find what's the best fit for their particular state. I don't think that at this point right now, it's still very early, so we're learning a lot more. But I don't think that we're at a point right now where we actually have a universal type tariff. But I do think that what's really happening is really trying to find the right fit for that particular state based on their circumstances. So hopefully, as we move forward, I think one of the things that NARIC can be really helpful with is monitoring and working with other organizations to see what kind of progress we are making with the large load tariffs. But I think that we're off to a really good start to really try to address this really important issue.
Diving adjacent to this, How can large loads, in particular the data center loads, be a more flexible resource on the grid, right? Especially as they scale, operators are very keen to figure out with the constraints they have, well, can you guys help us be a part of the solution? So I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts in this area.
Well, I do think that we have a really big opportunity here, and it's not just one thing. I think it's really a portfolio. First, you have the on-site assets, their storage, generation, hybrid systems. Those can really provide resilience and grid support if structured correctly. Second is demand response and load management. Some portion of load can be interruptible or shiftable if the incentives are right and if reliability requirements are met. Third is being a platform for flexibility. I think a data center campus can sometimes host or enable distributed resources or enact with broader virtual power plant structures. And I think fourth is the frontier, I think, is compute shifting. The idea that workloads can move across geography or time is real, but it's still very early. Not everyone is really ready for it at this moment, but I think the direction is very clear. Flexibility will become a competitive advantage. So I think the key is regulators and utilities really need the framework that value flexibility and ensure it's reliable when called upon.
Tired of costly grid upgrades and unpredictable demand? Virtual Peaker's AI-powered virtual power plant software empowers utilities to maximize the value of distributed energy resources. The cutting-edge platform optimizes DER operations, enhances grid stability, and unlocks new revenue streams. Learn more at virtual-peaker.com. Now back to our episode.
So we're going to shift a little bit here. I think it's an ANOPR, if I'm getting my acronym right. FERC is definitely in the game here to think about what role interconnecting large loads is going to play. I guess my question to you around this is, how do you feel like this might shift the balance between state regulatory and federal regulatory? And maybe you can just give us a bit of the lay of the land on where this is at and what sort of impacts you think it might have.
Sure. I will say that the most important thing is to really separate the jurisdiction from the coordination. FERC has the authority over the wholesale markets, transmission planning in that context, and interconnection rules that affect the regional systems. Now, states, we regulate the retail service, the distribution, and the rates. And the states also have major roles in siting and cost recovery structures. What the ANOPR signals is that large load interconnections are becoming significant enough that it can affect the regional reliability and market outcomes. And so I'm not a FERC commissioner, but I do think that FERC is asking, do we need more uniform rules? Do we need more study requirements? Do we need more transparency, or do we need better planning integration? I think those are some of the things that's probably being deliberated as we speak. Now, from a state perspective, I think the goal should be avoid any type of jurisdictional fight or tug of war. I think that we certainly need to align the process so that reliability and affordability are protected, and we can do so where we don't create any type of conflicting requirements for utilities or customers. So I like to kind of describe it as FERC is looking to strengthen the regional framework, and states, we still will be essential for the execution and for consumer protection.
On resiliency, the system is being pressured from so many different perspectives and angles. How do we make the balance, right, of making necessary investments, but making sure that affordability is met, making sure capabilities are done? What sort of, kind of quick thoughts do you have around the resiliency topic?
So I think that we're past the point of treating resilience as a special topic. I think it's now a core grid function. We're seeing more and more frequent and more severe disruptions that are happening. Storms, heat events, cold events, flooding. And the lessons are still the same. You need to kind of have a layered approach. So I think near-term progress kind of looks like better situation awareness. Maybe it's sensors, automation, visibility, targeted hardening critical assets, substations, feeders, serving essential services. Certainly it's sectionalization and faster restoration. And it's always just the bread and butter of vegetation management and operational readiness. Hardening that addresses multiple threats is really about prioritizing the nodes that are common failure points across scenarios. If a substation is vulnerable to both flood risk and storm damage, I think the investments there can reduce multiple categories of risk at once. And from a regulatory perspective, we certainly want resilience investments to be measurable, prioritized, and cost justified.
So let's chat about the inside of those data centers, and let's talk a little bit about AI. How do we win the AI race, and how do we use AI better on the grid?
Sure. I think that there are two AI conversations that are really happening at the same time. The first is AI is a demand driver. That's the data centers and the compute conversations. And it's real, it's accelerating, and it has major implications for planning. The second is AI as a tool to run the grid better, forecasting, predictive maintenance, system optimization, and outage management. So I'm very optimistic about how AI can be as an assist, but I'm cautious about AI being a decision maker for critical functions. I think trust and accountability actually matter in that space. So I think the safeguards should include cybersecurity requirements, transparency about model performance, validation and auditing standards, human in the loop expectations for critical operations, and fail-safe operation nodes if AI tools basically it becomes compromised. So I think the bottom line is that AI can certainly help us operate smarter, but we should not outsource the accountability part.
And this will be our second to last, and I always call this one my people power question, right? We can't do it without people that are capable. Doesn't matter what we're trying to do. But I guess I'll direct this question to you on, from the commission standpoint. Commissions, are somewhat notoriously thinly staffed. Everybody's got so many things on their plate. How do we, meet the day with the workforce, with the commissions, and with the people that are also so critical to making the decisions on the investments that we're making in the grid?
Sure. Well, I would say that we can't build the grid. We really need to do it with people. There's no way we can do it without people to design it, to permit it, to operate it, and to regulate it. And so I think for me, as someone who actually chaired one of the committees at the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, being chair of the Diversity and Workforce Committee, we've really learned that there's priority skills that are really important that needs to be included within the industry. There's power systems engineering, there is protection and controls, there's cybersecurity, there's data analytics and modeling, there are skilled trades such as line workers, substation technicians, and most importantly, there's the regulatory talent. There's economists, engineers, attorneys, and experienced staff who can evaluate really complex filings. And so we also have a capacity issue in this ecosystems. There's a lot of retirements, there's competition for talent, and there's shifting priorities all across agencies and industries. So workforce is not just a human resource issue, it's a reliability and affordability issue. Delays and mistakes are costly. We need pipelines, we need training, and we need partnerships with community colleges, universities, and most importantly, labor groups.
All right, so our last question is going to be this one about, do you have the right tools, essentially? So, is the right information and the right systems in place for regulating our modern grid? And, how is that balance between regulators and utilities going in the current state?
Sure, that's a really great question, because I think the honest answer is we have a strong foundation, but the system is certainly under strain. From an informational standpoint, regulators today have access to more data than ever before. Load forecasts, congestion costs, outage metrics, interconnection queues, distributed resource penetration, and even weather modeling. That visibility into the system is far greater than what it was probably even seen, let's say, 10 years ago. But the modern grid is just so much more complex. We're regulating not just wires and generation anymore. We're regulating digital infrastructure demand, cybersecurity risk, distributed energy resources, resilient investments, and increasingly AI-enabled operations. So the question isn't just whether we have the information. It's whether we have the right tools and analytical capacity to translate that information into sound decisions quickly. Now, in many cases, we're adapting in real time. We're updating planning requirements. We're asking for scenario analysis. We're requiring more detailed cost justifications and incorporating new technologies into review processes. But there's no question the pace of change and testing traditional regulatory timelines. It's certainly happening a lot faster. And so on balance, or I should say on the balance between regulators and utilities, I say that it's certainly constructive, but it's also evolving. Utilities are being asked to move a whole lot more faster than at almost any point in recent history. Faster interconnections, faster transmission build out, and more resilient investments, as well as more digital integration. Now, at the same time, regulators are being asked to maintain affordability, protect customers from undue risk, and ensure investments are prudent and durable. Now, that tension is very healthy. It's not adversarial at all, but it's certainly structural. Utilities propose and regulators test. Utilities forecast and regulators stress test. And that's how the public interest is protected. So the relationship about decisions and full evidentiary-based evaluations and where participants can actually have, disciplined collaboration, that's really important today. The regulatory model, I think, still works, and I think it works very well. It's transparent, it's evidence-based, and it's accountable. But the modern grid requires that the model to be a lot more faster, more technically sophisticated, and more anticipatory. And so I think that's where the opportunity really lies in front of us. Not to abandon the regulatory compact, we shouldn't do that, but to modernize a way to how we can actually execute it.
Commissioner Jehmal Hudson, this has been a lively conversation. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you, sir. It's certainly been a pleasure. Thank you again.
Thanks again to our season sponsor, Virtual Peaker. If you enjoy GridPulse, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform, give us a like or a review, and tell your colleagues. You can listen to all episodes and learn more about our efforts to advance the grid at gridforward.org.